Adjunct Professor Moran, Microeconomics 112. In this unit, we're going to be discussing types of business competition. That ranges from pure competition, the best for society, to monopoly, the worst for society. And then we're going to discuss the intermediate forms of competition, monopolistic competition and oligopoly. What they all have in common is costs. So costs are critical to the understanding of the next chapters. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time getting familiar with costs because their cost behavior will distinguish one from another. Before we start discussing costs, I wanted to give you an overview of the types of different business competitions that exist, which is where we want to go through our discussion of costs. The very best for society is pure competition, also known as perfect competition. We're going to discuss the types of competition down this column, down this column in these rows. And what will distinguish one from another is these characteristics across the top: number of firms, type of product, conditions of entry, price setting behavior. So by cross-referencing the table, we will know what the characteristics of each type of competition is. Pure competition is characterized by many competitors. They all sell a homogeneous product, which means identical. They're selling exactly the same thing, leaving the consumer to only choose between competitors based on price. It's relatively easy to enter or exit this industry. As a result, if someone's making the profit, firms will be attracted from other industries and enter this, driving down price to where there's only what's called a normal profit, which will eventually be discussed. Supply and demand alone determines the market price. No individual is large enough to influence the overall equilibrium price. The rest are forms of imperfect competition. Monopolistic competition is an oxymoron. You can't have monopoly if you have competition. You can't have competition if you have monopoly. So we'll explain what that means shortly. In an industry characterized by monopolistic competition, there are many competitors, each selling a slightly different product, and it's relatively easy to enter or exit this industry. Price is determined by the market, supply and demand, with some amount of price latitude in terms of setting prices compared to competitors. There's really nothing that sells in a purely competitive industry. The assumptions are too extreme for real life. And as you're going to see later when it comes to discussing what a homogeneous product is, it's very difficult to establish. There are many firms that compete under conditions of monopolistic competition. Pizzerias, for example, there are many of them. It's easy to enter and exit the industry, and one slice of pizza is different from another. And even if you had pizzas that were identical, location serves to differentiate products. Pure oligopoly. Oligopoly means few, production by a few firms. Pure oligopoly means they're selling identical products. So there are few firms in a pure oligopolistic industry, and they're selling exactly the same thing. Why are there few firms? Because there's something stopping competitors from entering this industry. It could be because of large expenses necessary to open a factory. Steel mills, for example. One roll of steel is identical to another roll of steel. The expense and regulatory barriers to opening up a steel mill limit the number of competitors to few. There could be market forces, supply and demand, plus considerable discretion in pricing among the competitors, meaning they could charge different amounts. Differential oligopoly still has few industries, few competitors in the field, but they're selling differentiated products. Domestic automobiles, for example, if you want to buy a Ford, a General Motors, and Chrysler used to be a domestic country, it's now owned by Fiat. If you want to buy a domestic car, there's a few producers, and they sell different cars. So Ford's luxury car is not the same as General Motors' luxury car. And there are substantial barriers, such as the expense of opening a factory. Finally, there's monopoly. When there's only one producer, the product is unique, and entry can be blocked. This can be done either through legal restrictions, like a patent on a product, like Windows, or it can be done by the government giving monopoly to, say, the water or electric company, for example. Using these, we're going to practice a little bit and see if we can find who's the monopolist. All right. So do this by trying to distinguish whether these examples have one, many, or few competitors, and in addition, is their product identical to everyone's, different, or unique. These are somewhat ambiguous. If these questions appear on the next test, I will make them so they cannot be misinterpreted. Alright, so Inspector Marquette's, get it, market competition, yuck, 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 is trying to find out which suspect is the monopolist. He knows that each represents a firm in a different market structure, but which is which? Use the quotations below, the information in handout 371, and the process of elimination to help Inspector Etz specify the market structure for each suspect. Look, I'm not the monopolist. I have plenty of competition. If I tried to raise my price, I'd lose business to giant industries. No, sir. I wait for them to raise prices, and I follow along behind. They're making a joke of a company called United Technologies, and although it's a plural, it's one company that does a lot of things. It's a very large company. So it seems like there's one very large company and a couple of other companies that have to follow along behind what this guy does. If this guy raises his price, they're going to raise their price. They're not going to try to undercut giant industries, because giant industries could turn around and start a price war with them, and giant industry would have more resources to sell at a loss to punish the other companies. That's called price leadership in an industry, and it occurs sometimes in the airline industry. Alright, so it sounds like there's not a lot of competition, and they're selling the same thing. So that would be pure oligopoly. I've got more problems than you have. New shops like mine are opening all the time. I have to spend money on advertising to convince people that my shop is unique and different. New shop sounds like many competitors. Advertising means that his product is differentiated. No one pays for advertising unless you have a differentiated product. Why don't you ever see advertisements for tomatoes? Because if a farmer advertises his tomato, he may create the desire on a consumer's part to have one, but there's no guarantee he'll buy his tomatoes, since tomatoes, when ranked by grade, are identical. So advertising serves to differentiate, is done when products are differentiated. And he's saying it's unique and different. So this sounds like monopolistic competition. I can't afford to advertise. It would eat up what little profit I have. Besides, what good it would do. My product is the same as everyone else's. So that sounds like many and identical. Alright, so just to reinforce that, many and identical is pure competition. Few and identical is pure oligopoly. And many and differentiated is monopolistic competition. So, many and identical for number 3 is pure competition. Well, my product is like no one else's. I work hard to make sure my firm stays out in front to avoid competition. Okay, this is monopoly. It's like no one else's. There are two types of monopolies, basically. There's competitive monopoly and a legal monopoly. So no one's going to give PSE&G a run for their money in terms of electric distribution. It's been given a legal monopoly by the government. But Bill Gates and Windows, for example, is a monopoly where he continually enhances his product and takes out new patents to protect his monopoly of that operating software. Good for you, but Inspector, I'm not a monopolist. It's tough to break into our market with huge advertising costs. That's a barrier to entry. Brand recognition means the products are differentiated. So this is a differentiated oligopoly. There are few, high barriers to entry, and brand recognition means differentiated. Monopoly, one and only product of its kind. That was the number 4, and this was differentiated oligopoly, few and differentiated products. So this would be like the domestic auto industry. This could be like Bill Gates or the electric company. So next we're going to begin to discuss costs.